Happy Sabbath. Happy day. So this ought to be bent as class, but she requested me to represent her. She's not around. So let us pray. Amen. So I want us to do something we have not done for a while. I think the last person to tackle this subject I've seen was Elder Paminda around 2020. I think we were in school. And what we were trying to understand is about the daily. So, and when you come to the subject of the daily, I understand that there are 4 versions of the daily. So today, this term has resurfaced again. And when we speak of the daily, the sentence itself is that the daily shall be taken away. And then something else will be done what? Will be set up. Are we together? So I don't know how many of us have had that, the resurfacing of that term, the taking away of the daily and the setting up of the abomination that maketh desolate. So I will want to deal with this subject if time allows, but even if we don't finish today, I think I have other classes because it's a broad subject. And just to list, which is the introductory thought that I want us to have, is that when you go to Daniel chapter 8, so I don't know whether to write my topic, the daily. I always have a problem with titles. So let me just put, let me just say the daily. Or stick to my old original title, the times of the Gentiles. So, and when you speak of the Gentiles, I will speak in reference to the daily. So that's the title of my study. So what I want us to see is that when you go to the book of Daniel chapter 11, we were able to see in that school, if you want more details of the study, I don't know the title of the presentation, but I think what was discussed in that class, in the book of Daniel, we came up with 4 examples or 4 understandings. So when you go to the book of Daniel 8, there is the version of the daily in verse 11. There is the version of the daily in verse 12. There is the version of the daily in verse 13. And so this is 8, 12, 8, 13. And then there is Daniel 11 verse 30 and 12 verse 10. This was seen also to have another version of the daily. So 4 explanations of the correct view of the daily. So when you try to understand these versions of the daily, Daniel 8:11, the daily was seen to be the seat or the crown. This one, in 8:12, these are the Visigoths. And 8:13, these are the powers, I would say, from Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And then the daily in this other are the three horns. So the reason why this is important is because we need to have the correct understanding of every version here. Are we together? If we, at all we want to understand what the messengers of the hour are saying, that the daily shall be taken away. Are we together? So when you come to an example of Curtis, Curtis has a presentation of the taking away of the daily. And when you look at Curtis' presentation, he's going to deal with the three horns and try to show that the three horns, the Heruli, the Visigoths, and the Vandals, represents the three institutions that have to be taken away for Trumpism to succeed. Are we together? So Curtis deals with this version here. So you'll see that the perspective is of the three horns. And then you come to Elder Terry. And what Elder Terry is trying to demonstrate is the taking away of the daily again. But now she's going to deal with another version and try to show you, when you come to the understanding of the daily, there are two significant terms that we use to understand. I hope we will have time to deal with them. The first one is what we called room or gadal. And what this actually meant is what? Exaltation, or to lift up. So I'm just going to write exalt. And you're going to see specifically when you come to Daniel 8:11, this is where Elder Terry's perspective is coming from. This is the three horns, and this is the daily in 8:11. These are the three horns in 11:30. So, and what she's trying to demonstrate is that the Republican Party is going to be taken out of the way. But that taking out of the way is to do what? To lift up and exalt. So we need to have the perspective of what this actually means for us to understand the perspective of the daily that Elder Terry is trying to demonstrate. She has also tried to demonstrate another example showing that the sixth kingdom has to be taken out of the way for the seventh kingdom to be what? To be established. And this gives us another perspective of the daily. So there are three versions of the daily that we are having today. The taking away, and this daily now is dealing with the sixth kingdom that has to be taken out of the way for the seventh kingdom to be what? To be established. So I'm saying all these versions that you see here, you need to have the correct understanding of the daily. So we need to go backwards and start understanding how we used to understand the daily. What is the daily? Try to deal with all these versions and understand why are they different. Are we together? And I think after understanding this, then we can come here today and start explaining what all this is all about. So that's an introductory thought to what I want to cover. So I want to go a little bit backwards now. I hope I've given you my thoughts or the objective of my class. And so for today, if time allows, I'll try to deal with this version first. So today I want us to deal with the first perspective of how we understand the daily. And this is the book of Daniel 8, verse 13. And maybe some other time we will deal with the rest. So I'll ask someone to read for us Daniel 8:13.
Then I heard one saying speaking, and another saying, say that to that certain form who spake, how long shall be the vision concerning the sacrifice, and the transgression of desolation, to bring both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot?
Okay, so forgive my voice. I don't have a good voice, but I'll hope I'll be able to finish. So when you go to Daniel chapter 8, the first important thing you need to understand is that Daniel 8 has two visions. So this is the first thing we used to understand. And what are the two visions in the book of Daniel chapter 8? Is that when you go from verse 2, and you will actually see it when you read, Daniel begins to tell us where he is. And this is important because this is the same place we will see that we get the concept of the two streams. Because in Daniel 2, Daniel 8 from verse 1, it is the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar. So I won't prove this because of time, but you are going to actually see that the third year of the King Belshazzar is the year 538 BC. This is actually the very same year the Medo-Persians will come and besiege the kingdom, and the crown will be taken by Darius the Mede. So it's the last year of the king of Babylon. And the verse says that it's a different vision that appears to him because he had seen a vision at the first. So if you want to know the vision at the first, it's Daniel chapter 7 verse 1, where he says, in the first year of Belshazzar. So the first year is where we put, this is the first year. And you can put 3 years backwards and know the date. This one we have Daniel chapter 7, the story that Ken was trying to teach us here. The kingdoms that are represented by the beasts of the field. And now this is 8, which the two visions are correlated together. So back to Daniel 8. So when you look at Daniel 8, it says that he's at the banks of a river, and I want you to keep this at the back of your minds because we will go to another story. Geography will take us to a story where Daniel is at the bank of a river, and then there is a conversation, just like we are seeing a conversation here. So I saw in a vision, and the point I want us to see is that from verse 2 up to verse 12, from verse 2 to 12, what Daniel will do is to see. So the aspect I want us to see is that of an eye. So I'm saying there are two visions, and vision number 1 is that which Daniel does what? Sees. But when you go to verse 13, and I will say to 14, Daniel will have a different vision. And this vision, Daniel will do what? I did what? Someone can read. Then he says, then I heard. So you can actually see by the change of sense, Daniel tells you he has shifted to a different story. Can you see that? So, and my perspective or my focus is on this second vision. I'm not interested in the first. I'll leave that to Ken. So this one is where our focus is, because Daniel will now hear something. And so this gives an introduction to a different vision. So, and what Daniel hears is what I want us to read now, because Daniel will hear one saint speaking. So you can read. So the first thing I want us to see is when you try to dissect the verse. Then I heard one saint speaking. So I'll try to draw something here to bring this to understanding. So there is a saint here. And then Daniel says, I heard one saint. So I'm going to call this saint 1. So Daniel can have a conversation, and then I heard one saint, and this one saint is doing what? Speaking. So then I heard one saint speaking, and another. So I'll put another saint here and put this another saint. So and another. So there is saint 1 and saint 2. I hope you can see that. So then I had one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake. So the question here to the class. So there is this one saint speaking, and then there is this another who is going to say. And whatever he says is this question that is there. How long? So, and if you put this into a simple statement, this is a question of what? It's a question of what? So the question is, who began to speak? So Daniel can hear one saint speaking, but Daniel does not tell us what the saint says. Can you really see that? And then what Daniel hears is a question, and this is a question. And the question is what? How? And then what will happen? The saint will do what? So the question is how long? We will come to the question. What is there is an answer. And what is the answer? Unto 2000, the sanctuary shall be cleansed. And this is what I understand. So to be able to understand that pictorial representation there, for me, I have two perspectives. And then I will subject them to you. And then you tell me whether I'm right or wrong. Because this is what I'm trying to understand. So, and I will try to buy a model from Revelation chapter 13. This is Revelation 13:11. So when you come to Revelation 13:11, there is a rule we use to understand the verse. And this is juxtaposition. So what is juxtaposition? So is there a difference between compare and contrast and juxtaposition? What's the difference?
I think juxtaposition is merely bringing them together and putting them side by side. While compare and contrast is now when you start checking what are the similarities, what are the differences between the two things.
Okay. Yes? Of force. Okay. So this is how I understand. They are so similar. There are a lot of properties similar with juxtapositioning and compare and contrast because they actually use the same principle. The main objective is to look at the differences and the what? And the similarities. But when you want to juxtapose, and I mean to show the difference, if you understand the concept of compare and contrast, what must be there is two things. Are we together? So if I take this pen and bring them together, what is that? I will compare and contrast. Are we together? And what you will be seeing is that there will be no tension. These are two things with same properties. These are blue pen, these are green pen, maybe same company, maybe different companies, all that. But when you come to juxtapose, it becomes complex now because I would take a bottle of water and a pen. And you can actually see that these two things don't have properties. Can you really see that? And because they don't, it's as if they repel to one another. And that's what Sabina is saying. What you really need to do is to force them together. Are we together? And I hope you get that. And when you actually force a bottle and a pen, you might actually see that there are no differences and similarities. Maybe they are all differences, but in one way or another, by closely examining, you can end up realizing that there are similarities, same color. Can you really see that? Just a simple example. So when you come to Revelation 13, this technique we used to compare or we used to juxtapose a lamb and a what? We used to juxtapose a lamb and a what? So when you come to the lamb, you are told that the lamb, the characteristics associated with the lamb is what? It's the horns. And the characteristic associated with the dragon is the what? Is a mouth. The speaking. Are we together? And what do you realize? What is the purpose of compare and contrast or juxtaposing? It's merely just to see similarities and difference, but it is more of realizing that this is a tool that you can actually generate hidden information, the hidden treasure. Are we together? So you are given information on one side and you are required to dig out information by looking at the other side. And this is what we realize, is that it's complex to force these two together, a lamb and a dragon. Because if it's a lamb and a lamb, it's easier. But they look at each other as two contrasts. But when you actually force them together, what you end up realizing is that you can fill this gap and realize that the dragon also has horns and the lamb also has a what? Has a mouth. And you can actually see this is United States of America. The lamb has horns and a mouth. The dragon has horns and a mouth. But you know there is a contrast. The speaking of a lamb is different from the speaking of a dragon. The two horns of a lamb, you will say they are separate. The two horns of the dragon, they are what? They are united. So this is one example of a technique that I wanted us to see. And I'm saying, I tend, sorry. Okay. And I'm seeing the same perspective when you come to the story of Daniel 8, verse 13. Because in one perspective, it might be easier to see that this answer is a direct answer to the question. But you really need to understand that the question asked here is not and the answer given here, they are not so much related as we would say, because the 2300 days here given are not an answer to how long, because the question here is how long shall two things, the daily and the transgression of what? Of desolation. And what is their work? They are going to give the sanctuary and the host to be done what? And if you think that the 2300 days is the how long, then there is a problem. You need to realize that this is a response, but it is not the response to the time asked in this question here. And what you now need to understand is that if I put this story here, you'll actually see that this saint was speaking. And whatever the saint was speaking, Daniel does not tell us. But he says, I heard the saint speaking. Maybe he was not attentive. Maybe he was not listening. I don't know. But he doesn't tell us what was the conversation. He was the first to speak. And then this saint asks a question. So I'm going to put this as a dash here. And then this one is a question asked. So there is a question asked. And then this question doesn't receive an answer. Does this question receive an answer? There is an answer given here. So this answer given here is concerning the 2300 days. And this question here given is the question of how long. When these two powers, the daily and the transgression of desolation, will give the treading underfoot. And I'm saying this question that is asked here, the answer is not given in that verse. We will have to work out the answer of how long. Can you really see that? So when you separate this question and this answer, then you realize to be able to answer this question, you need to fill this information here. You need to get the answer which is related to this question, because this answer maybe is related to what the angel was speaking there, which we didn't understand. So you need to understand, we have to work our way out to understand how long. So this is a question asked that receives an answer that doesn't fit. Maybe the question should be, how long shall it take to cleanse the sanctuary? And the answer is, and 2300 days. Here the question is, how long shall these two powers tread underfoot? And for those who know the answer, what is the answer? What is the answer? 2520. So you can actually see, you fill the gap. And you really need to understand that dynamic when you come to Daniel 8:13. There is a close relation between the 2300 days and the 2520, but these are two different prophecies.
I have a question.
Yes?
What we are calling the answer of the 2300 days, I noticed that it's not part of the conversation between the two saints, but this one is somebody talking to Daniel. Because Daniel hears those two saints talking. And then at the end, at verse 14, it says, and he said unto me, which I think is unto Daniel. So it almost seems like, what can I say? This is not part of the conversation. Like whatever this person is saying to Daniel, it may be perhaps in reference to what they were talking, but it's not the two talking to one another. It's now this person is now coming and telling Daniel something. Is that what you said?
Yeah, all I'm saying is that there is Daniel here. So this is Daniel. He's at the banks of the river. And Daniel here, I tend to think these two want to ignite a conversation for Daniel to understand something. So this saint is speaking. Daniel can hear the saint speaking, but he doesn't tell us what the saint says, one speaking. But he tells us what this saint spoke. And what is the saint speaking? This saint is going to speak to this saint, and he's going to ask the question, how long? Are we together? And when you go to the next verse, the verse says and. I hope you know that and is a conjunction, so it has to join us to the previous story. And the answer given, you are actually going to see that as this saint spoke to this, the answer that is given to who? To Daniel. And Daniel gets confused. And you continue reading the conversation, and they will begin to make Daniel understand what you told him. And Daniel ends up getting lost, because what Daniel will do, and we are going to see that, is the way he understands the question and the answer, he joins them together as one. So according to Daniel, what is there is that if you look at where the prophet stands, Daniel, this is the year, what is it? 538. And 538, this is the same time we'll see the fall of what? The fall of Babylon. So how many years to their setting free? When are they set free? 536 BC. So from where Daniel stands, it's only 2 years to their freedom. Are we together? And Daniel understands this question. It's how long shall these heathens, I will put it simple, the daily and the transgression of desolation, give the sanctuary to be trodden underfoot. So Daniel understands the sanctuary here. We will try to understand that later, that it is God's sanctuary and the host is God's people. So how long shall they be trodden underfoot? And when Daniel connects to the 200 days, 2,300 days, 2,300 days, if you convert them to years, it's how many years? Around 6 years. So what the problem that Daniel will have by connecting the two, he will end up thinking that actually God, because of their transgression, has added them another 4 years of captivity. So, and because he's now confused, Daniel chapter 9, the beginning of the verse, which is the first year of Darius, it's the same story. If it's the fall of Babylon, this is where you would also put Daniel 9. He goes back to the books of Jeremiah to do what? To confirm whether when Jeremiah meant 70 years or actually what? 70. And what does he realize? That God did not in anywhere of Jeremiah's prophecy put an additional years. So what will Daniel do? He thinks we are under the curse of Moses. God told us, if you continue in sin, I will multiply your what? Your punishment. So what will Daniel begin to do? Pray, making intercession on behalf of the entire congregation. So what you have in Daniel 9 is now Daniel praying, wondering why God would give them 4 extra years of captivity. Then on the same chapter, the saint returns. From the very first time you started praying, what happened? I was commissioned to come and do what? Make you understand. And what the angel will do now, he will try to expound the story to Daniel, and he will more focus on what? On the 2300 days prophecy. So the story of Daniel chapter 9, the explanation is this portion here. So Daniel chapter 9, the angel comes and starts explaining to Daniel that the cleansing of the sanctuary here is no way related to your days of captivity. This is a different vision. This is a story about this one, and they are not connected. I hope you can really see even from the explanation. Later in Daniel chapter 10, it's when the angel Gabriel will now come and start explaining to Daniel this story. We will see that if we have time. So I tend to think these two have a conversation for Daniel to understand. And I think we used to have a concept where we said there is a time a prophet is involved in a vision individually. And at that capacity, like a good example is that of John. John is told, eat the literal book. Are we together? It's not actually John, but what John does is that he represents God's people, the Millerites, who are to eat the literal book. The literal book is the first angel's message. So the same story with Daniel. He will be told, you cannot understand these things because these things are sealed. It's a people who will be made white and purified, who are called the wise when we go to 12, who will understand. So Daniel at that capacity will represent someone who doesn't understand, and later Daniel will say that I understood the vision, this one. He will not represent people who will actually understand. So it's a conversation ignited for Daniel to understand. I think that's what I understand. So, nilikuwa happy. So there is a conversation here between two saints. I hope you get my perspective. You need to separate the two visions for you to understand. And because I'm not dealing with the 2300 days, I'm not dealing with this, I'm dealing with this. And this is my focus, the times of the Gentiles. So this is this is Daniel 8:14, and this is Daniel 8:13. So, and I said my focus is on Daniel 8:13. So, and I want us to go back and start dissecting the story again. So the question is, how long shall be the vision? And as I have said, how long? The question is about time. How long shall be the vision? And this is the vision concerning what? So the first important lesson we need to understand. So the verse says, the daily sacrifice. And I want to suggest, when you go to early writing 74.2, someone can read that for us. Early writings 74.2.
And I saw in relation to the daily, Daniel 8:12, that the word sacrifices applied by man's wisdom and does not belong to the text.
So the most interesting thing is that when it says the daily, so this is a definite article. And what's the interesting bit about a definite article? What does a definite article show? There's another story we go and mark a definite article. This is the story in Daniel 11 what? 36. It speaks of the king. So article there is a definite article, and what is article there representing? Yes? This definite article gives us the perspective of a specific king. So if it's the daily, it's something specific. It cannot be anything else. It's a definite. And then it says, as according to the quote, that the word sacrifice is a what? Is a supplied word, and the correct view of the daily has been given to those who gave the judgment how a cry. So I'm suggesting when you go to the Millerite history, they are the ones who are going to give the judgment how a cry, and they will have the correct understanding of the daily. So going to the concordance, this is H8535. 8548. So the daily, it's H8545, 48. And what it means is that the daily means continuation. And what the Millerites understand, that the daily is these pagan practices. The problem with Adventism, they don't understand that the word sacrifice is applied. So they read the daily sacrifice. And what the daily sacrifice comes to when you run it throughout the Bible, it's that continuous sacrifice that was performed by the Jewish or the Hebrew people in the administration of the sanctuary. But these interpreters of the Bible, from the Hebrew tongue to the English tongue, whenever they came to a point where they didn't understand a word in English and they didn't have the correct wording, they supplied their own word. Are we together? And what the pioneers understand is that it should actually be the daily desolation. And this is the daily desolation and the transgression of desolation. So there are two desolating powers. And the Millerites are going to understand what we call the concept of the two desolating powers. So they are going to actually realize that the daily is a desolating power and the transgression is also what? A desolating power. So these are two desolating power, and what they're actually doing is to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden what? Underfoot. So, and the next important thing we used to understand is what is the sanctuary. So there are three versions of the sanctuary in the Bible. Who can remember? The first one, who can remember? These are all studies. Actually, there are two, not three. The first one was Mikdash. And the second one was Kodesh. So you are going to realize that Mikdash can mean any sanctuary. So it can be both a heavenly sanctuary or it can be a pagan sanctuary. In most instances, it's used for pagan because Kodesh means the heavenly sanctuary. So what you need to understand is that you need to go to the code name in Hebrew for that sanctuary. And that sanctuary there is H4720, which is this. So the sanctuary being trodden underfoot is God's sanctuary. So that's the first thing you need to understand, that these are two desolating powers who are treading underfoot God's sanctuary and the host. A host is a group or an army. So it's God's people and their sanctuary being trodden underfoot by these two powers. The question is, how long? So what we actually need to understand is this time here. How long? Because it has a beginning point and an end point. And we have to work our way to understand what is this daily and what is this transgression of desolation that give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot for a certain period of time. So the next important thing is that when you come to the understanding of this verse, there are two perspectives to understand that verse. Yes.
Say the Millerites understood the daily to be the daily desolation, because there are two types of desolation.
Yes.
How did they understand, or how did they arrive at the daily desolation?
Okay. I think that's a question I will answer in, as I explain why they come up and say that it's daily desolation. I think they will give proof to why this is daily desolation and transgression of desolation. I'll answer that in the call. If I don't, you please remind me. But I think I have that in mind somewhere. So let me do a short recap. So I'm saying we are beginning to hear resurfacing of familiar terms. So this is a call, and I repeat again, for us to go back to the old truths. Ken has told us from a quote here that the most terrible thing is for us to do what? To forget the way the Lord has led us. We need to come back and realize that God has led us in a good way through the past histories. So we need to have a revisit to the past histories. So, and I'm giving some perspectives of what has resurfaced, the taking away of the daily. And I gave the 4 understandings in this movement of what the daily is. The first one is 8:11. It's a seat or a crown. The second one is 8:12. This is the Visigoths. The third one is 8:13. This is the story of Daniel 2. So the whole story of Daniel 2, this is the daily. Then we have 11:30 and 12:10, the 3 horns that are plucked up. It's the daily. And then I said there are 2 taking away, and we will see. The first one is what we call room. This is to uplift. And the second one is what we call sue, which is to pluck or to remove. So there are two perspectives of to take away. And so when you hear the daily shall be taken away, all these takeaways, you also need to understand, is this taking away to uplift or is this taking away to set aside? Are we together? So those are concepts we will also revisit shortly. Then I said, when you come to the story of Daniel 8, I want to more focus on this for today. And I'm saying you need to understand this is 538 and Daniel is at the banks of River Ulai. And there is a conversation. There is a vision. We used to call it a snapshot. It's a vision that he sees of a conversation between 2 saints. And they are having a questionnaire. A question asked, an answer given. You need to have such a model to realize that these are 2 different visions. The question asked has its own answer, and the answer given has its own question. And the moment you separate that, then you can be able to argue out the vision of the 2300 days and the 2520. And then our focus is not on the answer, that is unto 2300 days. My focus is more on the question, how long shall the daily and the transgression of desolation give the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot? So at the end of the class, we'll be able to answer that question. So I came here and tried to demonstrate that the daily itself means a continual. It's something that continues. We will see what continues. And then there is the transgression of desolation. What they are treading underfoot is God's sanctuary, which is associated with God's people. So these desolating powers are actually hurting God's people and the sanctuary. So up to that point, I hope we are following. So, and I was saying there are actually 3 people who will try to understand the verse. And the first person who will try to understand this verse, so there are 2 people. Let me just say there are 3 who will try to understand the verse. So the first one is William Miller. The second one is Hiram Edson. And the third one, I'm going to say it's us. So, and you need to realize that our importance in that verse, because what you will actually see is that both Miller and Edison differed and couldn't agree on the results. But principally, they follow the same pattern. Miller understands these are 2 desolating powers. Edison understands these are 2 desolating powers. Where they don't agree is where it begins. To Miller, it begins in 677. To Edison, it begins where? 723. That's the only difference they have. And our work here is to bring harmony, to take Miller's work and who? Edison's work, combine them together, and then realize that it's actually by combining their works that they actually needed to see more light in understanding the verse. So, and in a snapshot, I will explain Miller's understanding, and I will also explain Edison's understanding, and I will now come to our understanding how we harmonize those 2 versions. So, and because I'm not going to go into details, I'll give you references to go and look at their works. So this is Miller's works. And this is volume 2. This one, you find it from Review and Herald. I think it's December or what? It's January 3, 1856. Edison's work, the title is The Times of the Gentiles. So you need to understand this. And I'm suggesting it's important for you to go and look more because I don't have the time to go into details. So I hope that is clear for us. So when you go to William Miller, Miller will give us his own understanding. And I think some of the bits of what Miller understands is what Edison will pick, but he will try to argue out differently. So they have some concepts that will guide them to understand the verse. And the first concept is what I've written here. The first concept is the concept of the two desolating powers. So that's the first concept that they understand. That actually, the two desolating powers, or this concept, this is 8:13. And Daniel says, how long shall the daily and the transgression of what? Of desolation. And they are both treading underfoot the sanctuary and the host. And they will try to have other portions of the Bible that will try to support this concept. And the most likely one they will go to is also the book of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 from verse 1 to 10. Someone can read that for us.
Now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, and by our gathering together unto him, that ye be not soon settled in mind, or be troubled,
Yes.
neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by the devil, as it is nice, as that the day of Christ is at hand. When you now deceive you by any means, for the day shall not come, except there come upon our witness, and that man of sin is him, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalted himself above all that is called God, all that is worship, so that he, as God, seated in the temple of God, should exalt that he is God. Remember, ye know that when I was yet with you, I told you these things. And now you know what is called death, that he might be revealed in this time. For the ministry of iniquity, those that are going to work, only he from there left until he be taken out of the way. And then shall the Lord be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit.
Okay, up to that point. So I wish I had time to explain all this. But there is a problem with the Thessalonians. The same problem that was with the apostles in Matthew 23. I think I saw that study from William. Tell us, when shall these days be? And you will actually see the problem with the Jewish people is that they find themselves, they think they are so peculiar and so important to God that if the world would come to an end, it means that, if their temple would be destroyed or if their kingdom would be consumed, it can only happen when? At the end of the world. There cannot be an existence of this world without them. So when Christ says there shall not a stone stand upon another, they have a problem because they think this temple with its magnificence can only be destroyed at the end of the world. They have actually witnessed many attempts to destroy it, but none has succeeded. So And they associate and link the destruction of the temple with the second advent. And that's why those questions are the same. When shall be the end of the world? When shall these things be? These things, the destruction of the temple and the rest. So the same problem with the Thessalonians. The Jewish think the end of the world will take place in their time if the sanctuary will be destroyed. So Christ will have to come in their dispensation. It's the same thing with the Thessalonians. There are rumors that Christ is about to come, and so they are false messengers who are always misleading the flock. And so Paul is telling them, do not be shaken in mind by spirit, by any word that the coming of Christ is at hand. The Thessalonians think Christ will come in their dispensation just like the disciples, and it's not so, because Paul understands a bit of information the disciples didn't understand. There are three dispensations that Christ will give in the story of Matthew. The first one is the destruction of Jerusalem. Then he gives the days of tribulation. And the third one is the coming of the Son of Man. So the disciples will not understand the days of tribulation that are spoken in Matthew, the days that were to be shortened. So they will cut the destruction of the temple and overlay it with what? The coming. And it's the problem with the Thessalonians. And so Paul is now telling them there is a bit of information that you don't have, which is the falling away first and the revealing of the man of sin. So what Paul is going to tell us is that there must be a falling away first. And this falling away first is that there is something who has to let. He who letteth has to let. And how does he let? The person has to be what? Taken out of the way. And when he's taken out of the way, the daily is taken out of the way, then the man of sin is going to be revealed. So the verse in Thessalonians seems to agree with this quote here. And so what the Millerites are going to understand, or what specifically William Miller is going to understand, is that when you come to the prophecy, and this is William Miller, his understanding is that you need to trace this portion here. And this portion here is how long shall these two powers, the daily and the transgression of desolation, tread underfoot the sanctuary and the host. So what William Miller will understand is that this treading underfoot, what you need to understand as the first thing is the curse in the law of Moses. And this curse that they understand, they find it in the book of Leviticus chapter 26 verse 18. Because if you want to get the answer, how long, I'm suggesting the answer is in Leviticus 26 18. Because what is the answer according to Miller? Miller is clear, 7 times. So let's come to Leviticus 26. So in the book of Leviticus 26, I'm not going to read again because of time. You'll actually see that there are two things laid for Israel: a blessing and a what? And a curse. So if they will obey the law and the statutes, a blessing. If they will not, what is given? A curse. But the curse comes in 2 stages. There is what you would call curse 1, and there is what you would call curse what? Curse 2. So if you do not obey my laws, I will bring you a curse. That is the curse in verse 16 to 18. But if by all these things, the curse 1, you will not be have changed, what will I bring to you? Curse 2. So to keep the story short, the curses spoken as curse 1, these are the punishment that God will subject them in the reign of the judges. The Philistines, the Amalekites, the history of the judges. Because of breaking the law, he would allow world kingdoms to destroy them. rob them their children and everything. Are we together? And if that did not reform them, God foretells of a higher magnitude of a curse in the time of the kings. And in the history of the kings, this curse will be progressive. And it will be progressive in 4 steps. Curse number 1, curse number 2, let me put it this way. 1, 2, 3, 4. The first curse will take place in the history of Manasseh. The second curse will take place in the history of Jehoiakim. The third one is the history of Jehoiachin. And the fourth one is the history of Zedekiah. So what God foretells is the captivity of his people, and they will go into captivity in 4 steps. So if curse 1 will not reform them, curse 2. So basically, if you use the correct methodology to understand Leviticus, you will actually see that the curse spoken there is about what? Is about what? Intensity. God multiplying the curse. But when William Miller visits the verse, what does Miller say? It's not intensity, but it is what? It's time. Are we together? So this is what the verse says. This is what Miller says. So you also need to be able to understand and argue out what is in Leviticus 26. So when Miller goes to the verse, he says, God lays between them a blessing and a curse. And because he believes the people have sinned, God has multiplied the curse. This is the story now. He thinks God has added more punishment to them. But Daniel is wrong on the perspective in which he looks at it. So, what Miller understands, when God says, I will punish you 7 times, Miller has come to a realization that a time in Bible prophecy represents what? An year. And a biblical year is 360 days. So if it's 7 times, you will just close multiply, and what do you get? Sorry. It will be 7 times 360, and what you have is the 25, 20. So that's what Miller understands. So how long shall these people be under a curse? So they realize that the powers treading underfoot the sanctuary and the host is the curse that is being fulfilled in the book of Leviticus. And Leviticus has actually given them the duration, the time. And so Miller understands that this time here is 2520. What Miller now really needs to understand is, when did the curse begin? And Miller will be able to argue out that the kingdom of Judah went to captivity in 677. Here, Manasseh's taking was 677. Ellen White says that whatever happens to Manasseh, I will break the pride of your power, is an earnest of what will happen to the kingdom. So when the curse is inflicted, God begins dealing with the leadership. Are we together? So the taking away of Manasseh, Miller understands, is when the curse begins. Because after Manasseh, though he is taken by the Assyrians, the entire kingdom will now be subjected under the control of the heathen powers until Zedekiah, when they are totally wiped out of their kingdom. So from 677, according to Miller, this takes him where? Let me just put it simple, 1844. But you can put 43 if you want to argue it out well. So 677 to 1844. And he's now saying, this is the kingdom of Judah that is taken captive. And because Miller understands the concept of the 2 desolating powers, he will actually argue out that the first desolating power, which is this who exalts and uplifts self, you can actually be able to proof text this concept in the story of Daniel 7 and Revelation 13, the one who exalts self. And in Daniel 7, it's a literal horn. In Revelation 13, it's a certain beast with a head. And the literal horn here will be able to rule for times, and a half a time. In the beast perspective, it's given 42 months. And when you convert all that, a time is an year. So times, plural, this is 2 years, this is 1, and half a time is half an year, which if a year is 360, this is 360 times 2, and this is 360 over 2, which is 180. And then you add 360 plus 720 plus 180. What does it give you? So the transgression of desolation will be able to rule for how long? 1260. And this is where Miller understands the transgression of desolation to rule from 538 to 1798. I will expound more. And so Miller understands this first portion here for 15 years. That's why I said 43, because Miller initially understood 43 and he used to have a structure like this. You can correct to 44 later. Miller understood that this is the working of the daily, this is the working of the daily, and this is the working of the transgression of desolation. And what Miller argues out is that the daily is the pagan powers. And these pagan powers who are trading underfoot, where do I put it? So this daily here, which he's saying it's the pagan powers, he's going to suggest right from 677, you have Assyria who is going to take Manasseh, then you will have Babylon, then you will have Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. These all powers, this is the first perspective, that the daily shall be taken away. And what they understand, when you look at the meaning of the word desolation, what is desolation? I'll give you the Hebrew term for desolation. I don't know whether I can trace it. It's H8074. And the meanings that I got there is to appall or to show horror. When you put desolate, to desolate something, it's like to destroy. It's actually this act of treading underfoot. When you tread something underfoot, it actually shows to destroy completely. So these powers, pagan powers, are going to bring desolations to God's people here. And this other transgression here is going to, because transgression means rebellion. So this is a rebellious system that is also bringing desolation. So what Miller understands is that this first daily here, daily 1, I'm going to put it that way, is these pagan powers. And then daily 2, Miller understands from 1798 at the fall of the purple horn, this literal horn here, what was left in Europe is a power vacuum. You have Napoleon, you have the Britons, all these European powers that were under the control of the literal horn. They will be left to rule themselves. Are we together? And so, these European kings, as much as deliverance has not yet come, which is the second advent, we are under the control of European kings, which Miller also associates them with paganism. So this is Miller's version. How many minutes? Yeah? Less than 10. Okay. So that's how Miller understands his version. But Aram Edison is going to come and disagree with that version. I'm just going to give a simplistic one, and maybe next time we have a class, I will continue. So when you come to Edison, just to give a simplified one, Edison agrees with the curse in Leviticus and understands that actually this is the same story in Deuteronomy 28, I think. Yes, 28:50. And what Edison is saying, I agree with Miller's perspective, but I disagree on the beginning and on the end. Because what Edison is saying, Can you explain to me how in the year 1843 God's people were delivered? How the curse ended? How God's people were gathered? How God's people are freed? And Edison seems not to agree with the version. So what Edison will do, he will go back to the story of Daniel 8 and he will start arguing out from Daniel 8. So let's go to the story of Daniel 8 and see what Edison is trying to show in the less than 10 minutes that I have. So when you go to verse 15, 8:15, Daniel had seen the vision, sought for the meaning, and then stood an appearance of a man. Daniel hears the voice between the bank of Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. So I wish we had time to even understand what vision is being spoken there. So he came where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid, fell upon my face. But he said unto me, Understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. So Edison says there is some bits of information given. And the first bit of information given, Edison is arguing out that the vision is given that it shall be at the time of the what? At the time of the end shall be the vision. And Edison continues to say, now as he was speaking with me, Daniel is in deep sleep. He touched and set me upright. And then he says, I will make you know what shall be in the last end of indignation. So when you look at the word indignation, this is punishment. This is the anger of the Lord. So they are going to understand that the treading underfoot here is actually God subjecting them to what? To punishment. It's the curse they are trying to speak about. And you will see that Edison understands that for at the time appointed, the end shall be. So, and if the angel will help Daniel understand what shall be the last end of indignation, so there is a way we understand today. That's why I said there is us. Because we are going to argue, if there is the last end of indignation, what must there be? The first end. But to Edison, he doesn't have the first and the last. He only knows the last end is at the time of the end, which he also associates at the time appointed. And if the angel will make Daniel understand the explanation of the indignation, Edison goes to Daniel chapter 9. And in Daniel 9, there is verse 26 and there is verse 27. And I've repeatedly said this. If you want to actually argue out well in Daniel 9, you need to understand that there is part A and part B and part C of each verse. So what has been done is the concept of repeat and enlarge in those verses. 26 part A of the verse has been expounded more in 27 part A. 26 part B of the verse has been expounded more in 27 part B. 26 part C of the verse has been expounded more in 27 part C. And because of time, I will not read all that. But when you come to part A, I'm suggesting part A will deal with the 2300 days because it's going to be expounding on the 70 weeks. But both part B and C, which we will look at in our next class, will now deal with the daily and the transgression of desolation. So you will actually see an expounding on B and C, that it's the same story here. This will deal with the Messiah, the present, the cutting off. This will deal with the desolations. Because when you read, I hope we can exercise that. The verse says, part B, and the people of the prince shall come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. So you'll speak of the sanctuary here, and it's this God's sanctuary, and there is a people of a prince coming to destroy the city and the sanctuary. The question is why? The answer is in verse 27. Why is the answer? Because of overspreading of abomination, he, the prince, shall make the city and the sanctuary desolate. You need to harmonize those two verses. So, and the last verse speaks about desolations determined. And when you go to this part here, it says, and to the end. So Edison will paraphrase end, and what end Edison says, and to the end will be with a what? With a what? with a flood. And he's going to proof text flood to Revelation chapter what? 12. And what is the flood spoken about? Go to Revelation 12. I'm not going to read for you. Verse 6 and verse 14, they are the same. And it speaks of this period of the wilderness, which is 1260. So Edison is arguing out, if the end is at the time appointed, we have been given that bit. The end is with the flood. And what they understand the flood to be is this period of the 1260. Are we together? And this is the period of the reigning of the transgression of desolation. And if you put that, this transgression begins in 538, ends in 1798. So Hiram Edison argues out that is the period of desolation, when desolation comes to an end, is not 1843, but actually 1798. And what he does, he goes back to the story of Isaiah chapter 7 and chapter 8 and argues out. There is a story given in the book of Isaiah where God speaks of the taking away of the first kingdom. Judah is not the first kingdom to go captivity. So Edison argues out against Miller and says, I don't think the curse begins by Judah. Where does the curse begin? By Ephraim. And when is Ephraim taken? 723. So he doesn't agree with the reckoning point, because to him it's 723. And what he now has, it's his own version, and suggests that actually the two desolating powers, this is the daily, which they agree it's Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. This is the papacy. So Edison argues that the two desolating powers have to rule for a same time period, 1260, 1260. And he's ruling out saying, I don't see how the daily could first rule for 1215 and then allow the transgression to rule and then come back. He says that if the daily is taken away, it has to be taken away completely for setting up of the abomination that maketh desolate. So these two messengers, you can actually see how they try to argue out on their two perspectives. And so, because of time, I have skipped a lot of information, but because of time, we will stop there. So in our next class, we will pick all this, and then we will ask ourselves, how do we harmonize their discrepancies? And then have the best understanding, and then later come back to this and say, based on this perspective of the taking away of the daily, which version are we going to buy here? So I will stop there. I think it's up. Time is over. So I will stop there. Tuombe. Thank you, Lord, for this wonderful moment. Thank you for giving us a chance to come and review our old truths. They say that old is gold. As we go back to the path that you once created and the path that has been leading us, help us to realize that our salvation only is anchored upon these truths. And going back to them will give us light and clearer vision to see what is ahead of us and what is actually happening today. Help us to have the ability to understand. We understand the complexity of these verses. We understand the complexity of this message. But with your guidance, everything will be clearer and clearer for us. Be with us throughout the day until the end of this precious day. I pray this in Jesus' name.